How do you get from a first draft to a finished one? Find out in this video series, continuing with feedback. Hi, I'm Iris Marsh, and I help indie authors with their manuscripts so they can publish with confidence. In this video, we'll talk about getting feedback from different sources, namely editors and beta readers. So how do you actually process their feedback, and how do you use it to make your draft better? You can find out in this video. Okay, so feedback. Feedback is one of the most important things when you're writing your manuscript. When you're writing your own story, you become a bit too close to it, and getting feedback will help you see things from different perspectives. So it can give you different types of ideas, like things you didn't previously think about because you were kind of boxed in your way of thinking. And it will also help you see how readers will react to your story and if it has the intended meaning you were going for. So when you get feedback, you have different options. So you can get feedback from an editor or from something like a beta reader. So when you choose an editorial service, you have two options for this stage in your editing process, and that's a manuscript critique or developmental edit. So they're quite similar, only a developmental edit is more thorough. So with a developmental edit, you'll most often get a report with a lot of notes on all the different things within your story and suggestions on how you can improve any weaknesses that the editor finds within these points. And in addition, they might also edit little pieces within your manuscript itself. So this always happens with track changes so that you can accept or decline any changes that are made. I mean, they can also comment within the manuscript to make some points that they made in the report clear, or to explain a bit more about certain things that they noticed. How much they edit within your manuscript is very dependent on the style of the editor. And it also happens more with, in my experience, at least with nonfiction than with fiction, because fiction can be a bit tricky. At least when I do a development edit with my clients for fiction, I tend to not do a lot of developmental edits within the manuscript unless that I'm sure that this is a scene that will stay and will stay in this form. Because often at this stage, when you're writing your manuscript, a lot of things can still shift and some scenes might be deleted or rewritten, and then it's a bit of a waste of time and money to spend a lot of time editing that particular scene if it's going to end up being rewritten anyway. So I hope that makes sense. Well, with nonfiction, it's usually a lot more straightforward and it's easier to edit within the manuscript itself. So a manuscript critique is a bit of a more down-dressed version of a developmental edit, and for that reason it's cheaper than a developmental edit. And with the critique you will get the report with all the points, the strengths and the weaknesses that they find, and sometimes also suggestions on how you can fix them, but not as elaborate as developmental edit. So for instance, a report for developmental edit can be for a long full manuscript of 80,000 words, can be around 40 pages, whereas with the manuscript critique, this will be less, like 15 pages maybe, depending again on the style of the editor. So which of these options you go with really depends on your budget and on what you need. So if you have a big enough budget and you feel like you need a lot more guidance, then you could choose the developmental edit. If you don't need that much guidance and just want an overview of all the things that you should adjust, Or if you have a smaller budget, then a manuscript critique can already give you most usually of what you need to move forward. Then the other option is beta readers. And here you can choose either free beta readers or paid beta readers. So the free beta readers are usually people who are already interested in the author's work. And they might be really glad for the chance to read your book for free and give you some feedback in the meantime. Whereas paid beta readers have a bit more of a standard practice. They're a bit more professional in the feedback that they give, and that it's a bit more structured and a bit more, they know a bit better on what to focus on what the pitfalls are within the story, in my experience at least. So again, this depends on your budget and what you need for your story. If you would just like to have the feedback from people who are going to read your stories, then free beta readers can be very helpful. And sometimes paid beta readers can give you a more thorough overview of some weaknesses that they find in your story. And of course, you can also opt for both feedback from editor and beta readers. There's no reason to choose either or. It always just depends on your time frame and on your budget, really, what you choose. So we're going to start with the feedback from the editor. So what kind of feedback can you expect? I already explained it a little bit. So each editor has a different style, but overall they will look at the same type of things, such as structural issues within the global plot. This is one of the major things that they will look at. And it is also very crucial for your story. They also look at the flow of the scenes, character development, world building, your writing style, pacing, genre conventions, and more. And again, what they focus on specifically depends on the editor's style and their process. So if you're not entirely sure what you get from an editor in terms of feedback, just ask them and see if you can see like an example or example report or just some points what they usually talk about in terms of feedback. So you know whether that type of style fits with your needs or not. So here's an example from some feedback from an editor. And it's important, you should get insight in both the strengths of your manuscript and the weaknesses, because it's also nice to get some positive feedback and know that there are things that you did correctly. Of course, that's good for your self-esteem and stuff like that. The emphasis will be on the weaknesses, of course, because you are paying them to find these weaknesses and to help you improve your manuscript. So here are some examples of a manuscript critique, a few comments that my editor gave me on my draft of my second book. So an example of strength is, I think one of the areas that most impressed me in this draft was how you balanced physical stakes and Nikki's internal struggle with her teenage romance subplot. Hello, teenage angst. So that's nice to hear, right? And I think that's important because editors aren't there to tear you down, they're there to help you, and that also means encouraging you and telling you the things that you did do correctly, so that you know that that's something you're already good at. So an example of a weakness here is about my villain. So she's the main character that I recommend you revise. In this draft, she's dangerous and evil. She preys on the negative emotions of innocent victims, including and prioritizing her adopted daughter for her own hunger/addiction. And yet, I wasn't enthralled by her. We need to be for an action story built on life-death stakes and a power struggle challenging the protagonist and antagonist. So it's clear. This was a comment on one of my characters, a very important character at that, the villain. And she's recommending that I revise this villain. And the actual comment was a lot larger than I show here. So she does give some examples and asks a few questions as well to help me think about how I'm going to adapt this character into a stronger one. Because that's the other thing. They will give suggestions, but it's always up to you how you're going to incorporate what they say. Should be revised, which means, you should. It will help you kind of brainstorm what you want to say. I'm a bit lost now. No, the point that I'm trying to make is that they will give you some suggestions and also ask some questions that will help you brainstorm how you're going to revise this character or this plot point or whatever needs to be revised. So, how do you actually incorporate their feedback in your draft? So the most important thing is to don't take it personally. Their job is to help you improve your story, not tear it down. So I think it's important to stop viewing your story as your baby, because of course if you think of it as your baby, it's perfect and nothing should be changed. But that's not really the case, right? It's not perfect yet. That's why editors exist. So look at it more as like a lump of clay that you're trying to mold to perfection. And that way you can detach yourself from your story. It becomes a piece of art that you're trying to perfect rather than something that you poured your heart and soul into and is such an ingrained part of who you are that it's difficult to get any type of critique on it. And that's just not what you want. So don't take any feedback personally. They're just trying to help you, I swear. So read their notes more than once, twice at least, and take notes. For instance, if things are unclear, or you can take notes to determine which things you have to answer first. More often than not, the editor will give you steps to kind of guide you through the edits. So they will tell you, if I were you, I would start with this, then tackle this issue, then this issue, so that you kind of know where you should start first. And if possible, have a video call with your editor to talk through the edit. Often this is included within an edit or manuscript critique. If it's not, ask if it's possible, because it in my experience is really helpful to talk with your editor about all the things that they said. And if you've already had the chance to kind of think about what they said, you can then tell them about some of the things that you came up with, and you can kind of brainstorm together about how you can fix certain things. And that's always really helpful. So if that's possible, I would definitely recommend doing that. Then start with the biggest feedback point. So usually that's the one that impacts the global structure. So the bigger the impact of a certain weakness has on the global plot, then that's the one point that you should start with first. So first things that affect the global structure, then things that affect more subplots, then things that affect scenes, and so on, until it's down to just very minor things. And then, think if you agree with what's said, because you don't have to agree with everything that they say. Sometimes you can disagree and decide to leave something in. I would always caution to really think about it. Do you disagree because you think it's an invalid point, or if it's more subjective? Or do you disagree with it because you're taking it personally? Again, goes back to the first point, don't take it personally. In my experience, more often than not, the editor is right. They're professionals, they know what they're doing, and usually when they say something, it's correct. You don't always have to agree with their suggestions either. You can come up with your own solutions to issues. So you can think about how you can solve the issue and then see how that changes your story. Then you can adapt and revise where necessary. Or, it depends a bit on how you work, but you can also, after you know how you're going to change what needs to be changed, you can go back to the next feedback point and write down what needs to be changed based on that until you've written down all the changes for all the big issues, and then you can adapt and revise. And then you can go on to the smaller issues, and then so on, and then so on. And then you can just continue with the next issue until you've addressed each one. That's it. So for beta readers, what kind of feedback can you expect there? So feedback from beta readers tends to be a bit more general than from an editor, but it's still a good gauge to see how a typical reader will react to your story. So with beta readers, it's a good idea to create like a list with specific questions beforehand so that they'll know what they need to pay attention to. So some examples could be, what are your thoughts on character X? Were there any moments in the story where you felt a certain emotion? And if so, where and what emotion did you feel? Were there any moments you felt like putting the book away? If so, where and why? So you can get a bit of an idea of what they think about your story. And if you have, for instance, a very specific scene that you feel should have this really emotional climax, for instance, there's a scene where you think this should make the reader cry or at least have a little teary eyes, you can ask the reader in a very open way. Don't direct them to ask something like, did this scene make you cry? Just ask them, did you have an emotional reaction in this particular scene? If so, what type of emotion did you have? And if you didn't, can you think of a reason why that is? And that will help you to see if that scene indeed has the intended impact that you intended, has the impact you intended. Or if, for instance, readers misconstrue it and think it's something funny, which would be very bad if it's a scene where you want them to cry instead. So here's some example of feedback of beta readers that I've got. Because now that you clearly have an idea of these big elements within the type of feedback you get will depend a bit on how the beta reader works and what you agreed on. Sometimes it can happen that your structure is actually good when you analyze it, so it all fits. It has all the of your manuscript and the 5 elements like comments within the document, or you can crisis, the climax, and resolution. Send it as PDF, and then but it still needs to fit with your main content genre. So you have to make sure a strength example 5 elements within your structure are related to your main content genre. For instance, if you're writing an action story, pages can be risky. 5 elements, not a lot of time relate in any them, but you did a great job setting up to the life and death stakes that are related to the action genre. So that's a good thing to know, right? You might need some where you know that structural elements, some new plot could be considered a little tricky, and the structure itself makes sense. So I prefer to start in this instance, structure, at least that reader also started with your act structure to continue reading. Rearrange so that's things. Good information to have. And you can see in your notes that you made which part I would have liked a little more sensory detail. And like I said, also look that even as I felt that would have helped elements that did work better, whether or not they are tied to your main genre. And then you can brainstorm some new very helpful comment and something that you can easily fix by how that it adding more sensory details in the descriptions as you already have. Then kind of build out the structure of the scenes more, because now that you clearly have an idea of the. So how do you incorporate beta reader feedback in your draft? It's important to have more than one beta reader. That's because this type of feedback, other than from an editor, relies a bit more on personal preference. So if you only have one, you won't know if it's like a valid type of comment, for lack of a better word, or if the majority doesn't experience the same issue. Because if it's just one reader who finds a certain passage confusing, whereas the other readers that read it didn't find it confusing, then it's not something that you would need to fix. So it's a good idea to look for commonalities between each reader's comments. So do they say sort of the same things about certain passages or about certain characters, and pick those that appear to often agree with each other, and try to see what they're trying to say here. If the comments are very vague, for instance, if there's a comment that's common that says, well, I think this part is very confusing, I don't really understand it, and multiple readers say that, then you can ask them to specify the issue. Like, what did they find confusing specifically? Like, was it just one or two paragraphs? Was it something a character said? Or was it a certain transition? Or was it just the entire scene? Because specifying that would be quite important. Otherwise, you might end up revising the entire scene when all you had to revise were two paragraphs, for instance, and just add a bit of information. And then when you're very clear on what the issues are, you can make your edits. That's it. And then after you've revised based on the feedback, you can get back to more editing. But after you've done that, you can be pretty confident that your draft is quite solid. Your global plot and subplot should work, and your character should stand out now. And then it's time to take a closer look at your writing, which is analyzing your scenes. So it will probably take a while for me to actually get that video out there, because the way I work, I post these videos as I'm also working on them. And right now I still have to incorporate the feedback from my editor within my draft. Once I've done that, I will record. I will record the video on analyzing your scenes so that you can follow along again. But in the meantime, I'll post other videos with writing tips or editing tips, so you'll still have plenty to watch. If you'd like some more tips on editing, you can check out my free self-editing course, where you can find the link in the description below this video. And there you'll learn more about each state of editing and how you can do it yourself, or most of it yourself. And for more information on other types of editing or some writing tips, you can check out my other videos as well. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated for more content. In the next video within this series, we'll talk about how to analyze scenes to make your next draft even better. See you then.